have an operational treatment center and a shelter right now. Mm-hmm. We could have those online. Mm-hmm. There's one reason we don't, because we have a stubborn mayor who came in and wanted to blow everything up and then took 6 months of hand-holding to finally get to a point where he's willing to somewhat cooperate. Mm-hmm. That's where we are. And we just wasted a bunch of time. Mm-hmm. And so do I regret my decisions? No. I regret his decisions.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today on the show, former acting mayor Austin Quinn-Davidson with her wife, the former First Lady of Anchorage, Stephanie Quinn-Davidson. The decision to go into public service in today's political environment is a fraught one. But imagine taking over as mayor of a city during a pandemic after a scandal took down the previous mayor. That was what Austin Quinn-Davidson did. And as you'll hear today, the weight she carried on her shoulders was almost unbearable. But she and her wife did it for our city. We talk about that and a lot more. This interview was recorded in Ms. Quinn-Davidson's assembly office in City Hall, and you will hear some occasional street traffic. Disclaimer, as always, I do not speak for the Alaska Army National Guard, the U.S. military, or the federal government in any way, shape, or form. I speak for myself only. Austin Quinn-Davidson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in rural Northern California between Redding and Humboldt County in a tiny town called Hayfork. It was a logging town throughout my childhood. So some of the experiences and just lifestyle and community issues that we dealt with, I can really relate to folks from Southeast Alaska. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of similarities there.
My experience is that part of California could swing pretty red.
It's a red county.
It was a conservative place.
Yeah, definitely grew up. I think in a lot of ways, that's what attracted me to Alaska, beyond the natural beauty and all the activities here, is the fact that the community really reflected what I was used to, which was this magical mix of, we used to say hicks and hippies, and I don't know whether that's appropriate to say, but really, folks with really different political leanings, but people who could find a way to work together and do things in the community together, even with those differing viewpoints.
What was your family's politics?
My family, it's funny. I would probably say more on the hippie side, although there are some elements to my mom that might not fit that. For instance, she likes to say a phrase that we used to say in our town is like, now we're going, now we got things moving, now we're in good shape. She always says, now we're logging, which is kind of more like now we're logging, more sort of Hayfork specific vibe. But yeah, my parents are pretty free-spirited in general, and really into cooking and gardening and adventures and, backpacking and all those kinds of things.
And they still live there?
My dad died when I was 16, and my mom still lives there. Yeah.
I want to ask something. I mean, you don't have to respond to it, but I feel like, losing your dad when you were 16 would be a really traumatic event. I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, there were sort of a lot of things lined up. So, my parents were really poor. It's funny you talk to my mom. She doesn't think that. But, I think now that my wife and I are sort of in a different place, we realize we were both grew up really poor. We didn't have money for school clothes sometimes, and my mom was a cook occasionally, didn't have a regular job. My dad was a carpenter. We didn't work in the winter. We would drive our International loaded up with stuff down to Mexico, to trade blenders for blankets and bring them back. I mean, we were sort of always in this traveling, not chaotic, but, non-traditional family. And my parents split up when I was 14, and then my dad was sick and he died. And actually, my mom had already moved out because they split up. So my sister and I lived together alone in our house where my dad had lived with us for the last year before I went away to college. So it was sort of more than just the death. I think there was a lot.
When they split up, you stayed with your dad?
Yeah, my mom had a new partner that she was dating or had been with, and they moved in together. My sister and I stayed with my dad. And then when he died, it was August before my senior year of high school. And so my mom was at the time working for the school district, and she was busy getting ready for school. And she was dating this new person who, of course, we didn't really want to move into our house, the month that our dad died. And we just kind of struck this deal that we would live on our own. And my mom would come by and bring things over. But I remember cooking meals for my sister. And
Was she your little sister?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think, the death of my dad was certainly sad, but there are so much around it that it felt more complicated than that, I think.
So I'm going to ask 2 questions. They're going to seem unrelated. I'll let you respond to them in a way to kind of get us to Alaska. But why did you decide to be a lawyer, and or how did you get to Alaska?
So I remember, I went to UC Santa Barbara for school, and I started learning a lot about, my parents had been really involved in environmental advocacy because there's a big logging, it was a big logging industry, really focusing on ways to make sure we were protecting the natural environment around us while also supporting that industry. And so when I went to school in Santa Barbara, I sort of naturally gravitated toward environmental studies. And of course, the first big oil spill that led to the adoption of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, was in 1969, I believe, in Santa Barbara. So sort of this epicenter of environmental issues and history. And I started thinking, gosh, maybe this is a real fit for me. I'm so interested in environmental issues and how we use natural resources and the balancing of what people need and what the environment needs. But I started realizing that the way to really get involved in a way that could shape the rules was to be a lawyer. And so I think that you can do jobs where you interpret the rules, and really in some ways that's being a lawyer, right? You get to figure out, what does the statute say, or who's right on this front. To really be an elected official, that's when you're making the rules. And I think that was my trajectory, was, wow, I'm really interested in environmental advocacy and in natural resource issues. Wow, being a lawyer would provide me these great tools. And then, but what if some of the tools or the rules aren't fair? And, you see that in all different types of subjects. And for instance, in law school, I worked for the Civil Rights Clinic because I was really interested in, what is this fair? Is this fair for poor people who tend to get criminalized more often? And if it's not fair and you want to change the rules, being a lawyer doesn't help you, really. I mean, you can make little changes along the way through case law over the years, but it's really legislators who decide what's right and wrong in our society, and who make sure things are fair, or should.
So that's why you became a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And did you move up here to do environmental law?
No. So following law school graduation, well, first I took like 6 months off and traveled in New Zealand and Australia and all over, and then came back and worked for a law firm in San Francisco and doing land use law. And I liked some of the people I worked with, but it wasn't the right fit for me. So at that point I started thinking, where is my place? Where can I find? And really, I think I was looking to my background, like, where can I find that combination of people who somehow harmoniously figure it out together? And I used to come up here and visit friends from law school who clerked up here, and just fell in love with Alaska, and sort of the same story everyone has,
So when did you get up here?
2011.
And what led you to run for the assembly?
Someone reached out to me, actually Bill Falsey, former municipal manager. I knew Bill prior to any political stuff. He's also a lawyer. There's a crew of a lot of us who are lawyers here, who know each other from way before politics and judgeships and all kinds of stuff. And Bill reached out to me and a number of other women in West Anchorage and said, I think that this person on the assembly, Tim Steele, I don't know if he's going to run again, and you should start thinking about running, one of you. And I said, well, I might be interested in that. What does that entail? I didn't really know much about the assembly and what it did. So that's where the seed was planted.
So one thing that I've learned is that most assembly members today make the assembly their full-time job. You're in that minority of people who has continued working. How do you make that work? What's your current day job? How does that happen?
When I first came on the body, it wasn't as uncommon, I think, to have other jobs. We weren't as active. I mean, when I joined 2018, summer of 2018, Aircraft and Forrest Dunbar really talked with me a lot about the process, and to give, in addition to Bill, Forrest was really one who went out of his way to try to, educate me about this role and encourage me to get involved. And at the time, I think Eric maybe said, Eric always jokes with me now about it, but 10, 15 hours a week, it was such a different world. And I think it just depended on who was on the body. And I think that as some of the folks who maybe been on for a little while cycled off, and we got some really new, energetic people, it just got busier and busier. And as some of the problems in the city really ramped up, I think the meeting was starting just as the time I was joining, was starting to really take an active role in homelessness. And that takes time, and it takes a lot of work if you want to do it right. And so it was just becoming, at first I kept my job that I had and reduced it to 30 hours a week, but then I was working probably 30 hours a week on the assembly. And, with the schedule, as someone who comes to a lot of assembly stuff during the workday, nights, random times you didn't expect, there'll be things put on your calendar. It's not very conducive to a full-time 9-to-5 job. So I left that job and I went to work for another organization called the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council, which is the organization tasked with distributing funds collected after the oil spill for habitat protection, restoration, and science and research around the impacts of the spill. So I work there part-time, and then I work for the assembly.
What has surprised you the most about being on the assembly?
I think there's a couple things. One is it sounds so cheesy to say it, but what a difference one person can make. And I don't even mean that about myself necessarily. I mean that about seeing colleagues carry things, and find something they care about and make it so, and make it happen and change the way our city is run. And that is, it's pretty incredible, actually.
What's an example?
To watch that. I mean, I think that one thing that springs to mind as we're just coming out of a homelessness work session is having someone who is as knowledgeable as Meg Zalatel is about homelessness. And I remember when I first started, I came with a lot of the same viewpoints as the community might share, sort of simplistic ideas about what's going on, things you see as you're driving around, who you think the average homeless person is, and what the problems are and why we're not fixing it, et cetera. And, she's just so knowledgeable about that it allows us to actually move forward, because you saw in that work session, right? People are asking the administration questions. They just call her up. She's the expert. And that's really powerful. And to have someone on your team who wants to do the right thing and knows what they're doing makes a real difference. And, I think about like the alcohol tax, which Forrest Dunbar and Felix Rivera and I brought forward. And, people had done it in the past. We brought it forward. We're only going to do this if we're going to make a real effort, and we're going to talk with folks in the community and who support it and find out what they're going to do to tell the story. And because we put all that effort into it, because all those partners did that work, and because the community could then see the benefits, it passed, and that it's just kind of incredible that you can do that. You can just make changes in our community, now we're funding $2 million a year in early education efforts, which we know every dollar of investment in early education, there's a $7 return. And that's because you're not spending as much money in health costs or corrections later on. And we can make that difference. Like it's just pretty incredible. And I feel it every day. We get to decide. We're just talking with Star today about, which is the primary sexual assault prevention organization in Anchorage, about funding. And they really need some funding to continue doing the good work they're doing. And so I and Meg and Forrest put forward an amendment that our colleagues, I'm sure, will support. And that will allow them to continue doing that work in our community. That's huge. It's just huge. And that's from the alcohol tax. It wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have the revenue from the alcohol tax. So that's one thing that really not surprised me, but impresses me constantly. And then another thing is how mean people can be when they often don't. Normally the most mean people are the people who know the least, I've found. And, people are really comfortable saying some horrible stuff that is, if their mother or their father heard them saying that, I think they'd be quite embarrassed. So I don't know if it mostly is online or in hate mail we receive. And I think people feel, they're hiding behind their screens. And, but that surprises me about our culture and just where we are, that anybody thinks it's acceptable. We can disagree. We can, I was just laughing, talking with Alexis, the chief staff, the mayor. I love her. She's great. We have fun together. We can agree to disagree on things. We don't need to be mean to each other. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that surprises me.
You became the acting mayor.
I did.
Tell us about that. How did that come about? What was that process like?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty wild process, in part because, picture this, you've gone through a really rough summer because not only did we have COVID, the city was trying, led by the assembly and the mayor at the time, Ethan Berkowitz, was trying to do something that people thought was really controversial. And that was to use some of our federal funding to buy buildings to deal with the homelessness crisis, which had been exacerbated by the pandemic. Totally related to COVID. Not a crazy thing. Later, the IRS came out and said, oh, yeah, that's an okay use for that money. It's no problem. At the time, people lost their minds. They were so upset and so mad, even though we distributed $214 million of funding, to the community. So this was $12.5 million on those. It's a small portion of it. And so we had gone through this really rough summer of a lot of testimony, a lot of people coming in and saying things about people experiencing homeless, about people with mental health issues, which are not always aligned, but sometimes there is that overlap that, was sort of hurtful, back to the mean thing, and just feeling a little disappointed, honestly, in some members of our community. And then to have, be in COVID, and then to learn what had happened with Ethan and that he was resigning. And, at that point, and I just, Felix Rivera was a chair. And the way that you become acting mayor upon a resignation is to have the chair, the chair becomes the mayor at the time of the resignation. Well, Felix, being the humble, thoughtful person he is, said, well, I don't want to just assume that this body or this community thinks I should be the mayor. Perhaps it should be someone else, which I will tell you, most people would never do that, right? They would just say, oh, okay, I'm the acting mayor now, right? And get excited about that, which I'll tell you, there's some things to get excited about and some things to really not get excited about. But that wasn't Felix. And that's just how he is. And he's such an honest, humble person. And so he scheduled this meeting to make that determination. And then, I was the vice chair at the time. He was the chair. He and I spent hours together getting feedback from folks, people involved in the political world, other people who run organizations, just brainstorming. Like, what do you think? And I'm sure other people were doing this too. What do you think is right for our community in this moment? And, I kept saying, it can't be me, Felix. It's got to be you. And he'd say, I don't know. I think it should be you. And eventually he and other folks talked me into it. But, I always laugh when we have these people. It's less so now, but during the time of acting mayor, these people come in and testify and say, "Oh, you want power," and it's like, you have no idea how many days I spent trying to get myself out of this. It's a big job. And it was a hard time to do that. And we knew it. I knew it. Felix knew it. We all knew it. And we had to just figure out what the best path forward was. And this is how it turned out. But it wasn't easy. And then within a week, I was mayor, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was just no time to adjust. Who's your team? What are your priorities? P.S. Your priority is COVID, because that's what's going on, right? This is pre-vaccine, pre-ARPA funding. We hadn't gotten the second, round of funding that really infused into our community. It was a week before the national election between Biden and Trump. Emotions were incredibly high. People were, on both sides, very emotional and just feeling scared and hopeful. And, it was a crazy time to be in charge of a city. And we also had, we were in a state that I've talked to other mayors about this, about their experience. And a lot of them, they didn't have to deal with COVID in the same way we did, because they had state leadership that had a mask mandate or that had other, rules. Really, and honestly, I get along well with Mike Dunleavy. I like a lot about him. So I'm not trying to malign his character necessarily, but he was sort of hands off about COVID, right? It's like, we're not going to have a mask mandate. Oh, we're not going to have a statewide this or that. And I do appreciate that he supported vaccines. But I really was left with it. And when you have a city that's half the population of a state that has really no rules around COVID, and you're really isolated and you can't just fly to a nearby hospital, that's a lot of pressure, especially when you just became mayor a week ago unexpectedly. So anyway, that was sort of the landscape that I was dealing with.
So looking back on it now, do you think of it as the most difficult experience of your life? Do you think of it as the most awesome experience? How do you look back on it? I mean,
it was interesting. I was just talking to Forrest today about this, because we're just talking about what it's like to be mayor, and a lot of mayors, they just go to a lot of ribbon cuttings. That's a way you can be the mayor. Mm-hmm. You really can. And that was the opposite of my job. There were no ribbon cuttings. Honestly, I worked in my bedroom at home like 14 hours a day. It was the opposite of the way that a lot of people approach the mayor job. I'm not saying all mayors are like that, but I think that some are, and some spend less time on the policy, less time working with staff on getting their vision out there, and more being sort of an emissary. Mine, I got to do some of that, particularly toward the end. But, we didn't even have in person, we weren't even working in office almost the whole time. I hired several people who hadn't met each other in person until the end of my term. But at the same time, we were doing more than a city ever does, right? We were running the whole city. We had to deal with snow plowing and all the issues that the city always deals with, on top of dealing with a once-in-a-century pandemic with pre-vaccine. It was wild.
How did you know what to do?
That's a good question. I think that a lot of women and people of color, Forrest and I were just talking about this today too, are lack confidence to believe that they know what to do. And that is an ongoing challenge. It's the reason that we don't have a lot of people from those groups run for office, right? I mean, Forrest and I are talking about recruiting candidates, and how do we get a more diverse crew of people? And I'm talking like everything, like wealth, for instance. Most people on the assembly are upper middle class. Like, how do we get people who are not all like us to, and I'm not saying Forrest and us, I mean me and people like me, to run. And I think part of it is it's a bigger question in society of like, how do we believe people and trust them? And have people trust themselves that they're capable and they're competent. And luckily I had some practice with that. And I know I'm competent, and I know that I make good decisions and that I have good judgment. But I can't do it alone. And so I think part of it is humility. And, I met with the team prior to even starting, and we talked all about what was going on and who was going to be the point on what. I think that I survived it. Jason Bockenstead, reason number one, I survived it, chief of staff at the time and good friend of mine. And, but an amazing team alongside him, and folks who give their all. I mean, we put it all out there. We gave our all for the city. I mean, we were all working all the time. And when Stephanie joins, I'm sure she can tell you about that. But it's really it's amazing to look back and think about that we did it, and we did a good job. And, some people didn't like everything we did. Some people didn't like any of it. That's okay. They're entitled to their opinion, but I feel really good about what we did. And I still have people who come up to me and say, doctors and others who say, you saved lives in Anchorage. Thank you. You saved lives. And a lot of times it was just me, right? Like the assembly would support a lot of the stuff, but sometimes I had to make decisions that were like, that it was on me, and everyone was going to complain. And that's where that confidence of like, you know what? It's easy to hear the complaints when you know you're doing the right thing. And yeah, some people have asked, wasn't it hard to make those decisions? And it's like, it's not hard when you know what the right thing is. It's not. It's just, you just have to be brave. And
you have to be prepared that not everyone's going to like what you're doing.
And the bottom line is, that's the way life is. And I think that, people ask like, oh, does it bother you that, and I even said, oh, I'm surprised how mean people can be. Does it bother me? No, it really doesn't. And I think it's because it's just like something you could picture a mom or a dad saying to a little kid, if that's how someone's going to act, do you really value what they're saying? It's like, bullies will be bullies, and they're going to be bullies in the classroom. And there's some 50-year-old bullies and 60-year-old bullies, and they love to come to our assembly meetings. And I don't really, I want to hear what they have to say if there's something good in there. But if it's just complaining without any other solutions, I don't really care. I just don't. And I'm comfortable with that, and with myself, and with having a team and colleagues who are smart and kind and do the best they can in that situation.
Howdy, folks. It's the spirit of Alaska and Polaris, the bald eagle. Many people ask me if Polaris here's my pet. The answer is that Polaris is as free as, well, a bird. We're wonderful friends, and as such, we have deep and engaging conversations. One of our favorite things to do is discuss the latest episode of the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. If you're looking to deepen your friendship with your neighbors, I'd ask you that you recommend the podcast to them. Polaris already has some interesting thoughts about today's interview, and he really wants me to get back to it so we can debate it over some tea and salmon.
Well, speaking of not being able to do things by yourself, your wife, Stephanie, is here. Stephanie Quinn-Davidson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So let's just hear a little bit about you for a couple minutes. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. Pretty rural area. A lot of cornfields around me. Really small town. I think my town was about 5,000 people. Yeah.
Which by Alaska standards is like...
It's actually big.
Yeah. Moderately sized.
But, I spent my childhood, playing in the woods, playing by the river. I grew up in a very poor, had a very poor upbringing. My stepdad was like a mechanic that he ran out of his own garage. Sometimes there'd be, some employment, sometimes not. My mom was a bartender, working nights, raising 4 kids essentially on her own. And then she went back to college. And so then she was a full-time student and working and trying to raise 4 kids. And so it wasn't until she graduated college and then had a stable teaching job that I feel like we were maybe a bit more stable financially in our lives, and things started to change a little bit after that. But for the most part, I was just like this dirty kid running around on these country roads and playing in the woods and playing by the river. Yeah.
And how'd you get out of Wisconsin?
I went to college. I went to a school outside of Wisconsin, which was actually a big surprise to a lot of people in my town. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, but I was the valedictorian, and the assumption was that if you're the valedictorian, you go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's what you do. That's the best school you could possibly go to. And I kind of bucked that trend, and I went to a small liberal arts school in Iowa. And getting out of Wisconsin and going to a school like that really changed the trajectory, I think, of my life. I don't know. I think I would probably still be in Wisconsin had I gone to the University of Wisconsin. But being in Iowa and exposed to such a diversity of people, all different backgrounds, and then going to a very, very progressive school just started to open up my world in ways that I did not know existed.
And how'd you get to Alaska?
Oh, like everyone says, you visit and then you stay. I was kind of thinking about a career change. I was a professor. I was in academia. It wasn't quite working out for me. I realized.
Where were you a professor at?
Environmental studies and biology. So I'd actually accepted a tenure track job at Colby College in Maine and had moved out there. But prior to that, I visited Alaska, visited a friend up here, and just had an amazing time. And I went to Colby, and I didn't unpack the U-Haul because I was like, this isn't where I want to be. I actually want to be in Alaska. I'm going to find my way to Alaska someday. And I thought maybe in a year or two I would get there. But actually 2 weeks into my job at Colby, a position opened up with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And it was on the Yukon River, working with the communities on the Yukon. They were experiencing a salmon crisis, and it just aligned perfectly with what I was interested in, which was natural resource management, fisheries, and working with tribal communities, and Alaska. And I applied for it, and I got it, and I left Colby that semester, at the end of the semester, and I moved up here end of December 2011.
I hear the same year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how did y'all meet?
Steph told a Arctic Entries story, if you're familiar with Arctic Entries, back in the day when it was a little smaller, still a fairly big audience, but different environment. It was at Snow Goose, which is now 49th State, of course. And I saw her tell a story and was just like, the story is, she could tell you about it, I guess, but it's all about taking risks. And she blended the idea of her stepdad having passed away and his willingness and interest in risks. And just because you have the, do you want to describe it, Steph?
No,
you describe it.
You're doing such a good job.
Just because you have, so Steph grew up a poker player. Her dad was a kind of like semi-professional stepdad poker player.
But in back rooms, illegal. He was running illegal gambling schemes, essentially. And I used to accompany him to these poker games, and I would sit behind him and watch him play. And he would, show me his cards, and I just learned the game that way. And then when I got old enough where I could go into a casino and actually play, we would go and play in tournaments together. And we bonded over a number of things, but I feel like we really got close playing.
How old were you
together.
when you were accompanying him?
Oh, young. I mean, like probably 10 years old.
Because I'm just thinking, you've got to maintain a poker face. Like if he's showing you your cards.
Yeah.
So you had to learn.
I just sat back there, just watched. And then when they started showing poker games on TV, on cable, we would watch the games together and talk about the hands and how he would have played it, and the odds and the statistics and all that.
But the story that you were telling is that a pair of aces is a really good hand. And Steph would call them pocket aces.
Pocket rockets.
Pocket rocket, yeah. And so, you really want to probably play that hand, but he would say to her, don't be scared to fold your aces, your pocket rockets, because the hand might not end up, even if it feels perfect, or if it seems perfect, if it doesn't feel right, don't be scared to fold it. And, Steph's story sort of blended his death and risk and all this childhood stuff with moving to Alaska. And she had gotten the two aces, right? She'd gotten this tenure track position, and she didn't want it. And she wanted to be here. And so anyway, the story was really beautiful. It's September 2012. You can find it online, but it's all about taking risks and doing what feels right.
Here is a minute and a half from that Arctic entry story from 2012.
And to many people, I had the pocket rockets, the pocket aces of life. I had a long-term partner. We were both very successful. I had a PhD. We just bought this house, and I just actually accepted a rare, tough to get tenure track position at a great liberal arts school on the East Coast. And we were preparing to move across the country and, make that next step in our lives. And the thought of giving all that up, everything that I'd worked for, the thought of folding that hand seemed absolutely impossible, just daunting. How do you turn your back on everything you've worked for 11 years? And I thought of my stepdad, 56 years old. That's not very old. Life is too short, So 1 week after that retreat, I actually walked out of that relationship, to the shock of my friends and family, and I embarked on the most difficult 8 months of my entire life. In the next 4 months, I would live in 4 different places, and I incurred some tremendous debt because of that, but I was doing things that I loved, and I was rediscovering myself. I was thinking about what I wanted to do for a career at this point. I was thinking, I really want to work in fisheries. I have a strong interest in that. I want to work on Native American resource issues. And these are things that I had kind of been thinking about, but really hadn't considered, again, because I'd been on that path for so long. And then some friends convinced me to come visit Alaska before moving out to the East Coast. So I arrive in Alaska, and those of you that are transplants here like me, you know what it's like. You fell in love with this place as soon as you stepped off that plane.
So she came up to me after that and said hi, and I unfortunately don't remember meeting her because I had friends around and they were all thanking me and stuff, and is quick, I guess. But then 2 weeks later, I ended up going to a concert at the Brown Bear in Indian. My roommate at the time, her boyfriend was a singer in the band, and she convinced me to go down with her. So I did, and then she immediately ditched me, and I was at the Brown Bear by myself, like, oh, great, I don't know anyone here. And I was standing at the bar, and this woman came up to me and was like, oh my gosh, you told an Arctic entry story, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, you should come over and meet my friends, like, come on over. So I go over to the booth, and there's Austin, and she says, hi. And, she's really good at asking questions, and we just hit it off, and we palled around for the rest of the night, and it was great. Yeah.
I don't want to go anywhere that anyone's uncomfortable with, but I know from the first set of questions that I sent that I had used the term lesbian, and you had stated that you hadn't dated women prior to meeting Stephanie. Did you know at that Arctic, I mean, do you know you were attracted to women, or was it Stephanie? And did you know you were attracted to Stephanie when you went up to her the first time? Or how much did you know what was happening?
Yeah, I think I just knew that she seemed great, and I wanted to get to know her. And, I think that's the thing about all these categories is life is just sort of funny, you know? Oh, I met this person and I'm just gravitating toward her and I want to spend time with her. And yeah, I feel like connected to her and in all the ways that I would have a man. And I think that that happens more than people realize. And I think it's a funny story. I remember talking to a friend of mine after I met Steph, and it was like, yeah, I've never dated women, I guess, so I wouldn't call myself a lesbian, but I don't know. And she's like, yeah, right. You're bi. That's what you are. You know, it's like, well,
Immediately
maybe,
wanting to label
but yeah,
you.
it's just the labeling. And so, you know, I do struggle anytime someone tries to categorize me, and I don't care. People can categorize me however they want, but if they want me to really weigh in, I don't really know in a way. You know, I mean, if, you know, Stephanie were to pass away or we weren't to make it, would I date a man? Maybe. Like, I don't know. It depends on who I met. I once talked to a male friend who's in his 50s, and he's like, you know, very, very straight guy married to a woman. And he said, yeah, had I not found her, maybe I would have dated men. I don't know. It just depends. And I felt like it was this person who kind of understood as society goes forward, we're just going to be less obsessed with these labels and categories and, you know, which do you identify this or that. I think it's just like we're all just living. We love people who we love. And at least for me, it's not so simple, you know?
Right. Well, I will just say that I lived in Alaska the first time when I was in my 20s, and I was single and gay, and my life revolved around sort of gay people. But now being married with a child, we have no connection. You know, all of our friends are people with children. The vast majority of them are straight people with children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just what happened. You know, that's
Yeah.
When I first moved to Alaska, I did not, I guess, get super involved in the gay community here. I do identify as a lesbian. I was coming out of a long-term relationship and just kind of like, oh, I can't seem to make any of these relationships work with women. Like, what's going on? And I also had been, when I was in grad school, I was very much like ingrained in the gay community in Madison. I ended up going to Wisconsin, but for graduate school. It was just a hard time because the only place where you could really meet other gay people was at a bar. And there was a lot of drinking, and then there was a lot of drama. And that was the only place where we felt comfortable. And it just wasn't good for me when I was in grad school trying to like write a thesis. When we first started dating, like we didn't know a lot of other couples, gay couples, but now we've like kind of found our little community up here, and we have quite a few same-sex friends that we hang out with, and it's really cool to have that. It's really cool to have that community and share our experiences together. And some of them have kids and some of them don't, and yeah, it's good.
Did you have gay friends earlier? I mean, I guess what I'm feeling is that, you know, Steph had kind of gone to the super liberal school in Iowa and had sort of like this, I guess what I would say, a more traditional queer trajectory.
Oh, yeah.
And so you didn't. Did you feel like you were learning a new culture, that you were being
No, because, you know, I'm from California. I lived in San Francisco. I've also lived abroad, and I think in most of the places I've lived, I've ended up having a pretty close friend who was gay. One of my college roommates was gay. So I didn't feel like, oh, wow, a gay person.
Mm-hmm.
I've never met, that wasn't like that at all. But I think I just connected with Steph.
And throwing off labels, you know, when you told people that you were in a relationship with a woman, I mean, whether you used a label or not, it was kind of a coming out. Did you have 100% positive reactions from friends and family?
I did. And I think that that's something that I'm so lucky to have that most people don't have. And it comes from my family, and just family's just pretty free-spirited, open-minded. You know, my mom had some questions about sort of the category stuff, like, well, where do you fit and what, you know, and But really, in general, it's just support and love. And that's, I think a little different than what most people go through.
When I first met her mom or was about to meet her mom, I was pretty nervous. And she was like, why? My mom's great. She's super supportive. This is going to be great. And I just explained to her, all the times where I had met a partner's mother, it always seemed like the moms always had the hardest time with it. Just kind of had this, continuous struggle with parents. And that wasn't the case at all with her mom. It was great. But just kind of like, that was something that she hadn't experienced and didn't know that I was bringing that with me. That kind of opened up her eyes. And I think like the first time we went to a work like Christmas party or something, it was, it was like me coming out to my coworkers by bringing her there with me.
So you weren't really out either.
Yeah, working at Fish and Game, I did not feel comfortable coming out there at all. The culture there at the time was not, just did not feel like I could. And so it was a really big deal bringing her to the Christmas party. And I remember being pretty nervous about it. And then, that I think was kind of eye-opening for her as well. Like, oh, wow, this is like you're making a statement. And we're just going to a Christmas party. It's not a big deal.
Well, and that's the thing, as you know, Andrew, like your life and your like love somehow becomes a statement, and people are like, oh yeah, this agenda, and it's like, actually, I don't really have an agenda. Like, it's almost 6:00. We're probably going to go home, have some dinner. Like, it's pretty basic, we're just doing the same thing everyone else is doing. But, when you have a board member, where I worked at a board member, oh, what's your husband do? Do I say, I don't have a husband, I have a wife? Or do I say...
Right. Or just let it go.
Do I let it go? And you let it go sometimes because you don't want to fight it. And you know that someone who's going to ask a question like that probably, instead of saying, oh, what's your partner do? Or, tell me about your family. Or, that there's some pre-assumptions. Maybe not. Maybe someone just wasn't thinking, and that's okay. But it's just a lot of work. And so do you want to, person by person, change people and get them to understand that you're just like them? Or is it worth it that day? And it's always a statement. It can't just be,
Yeah, I'll throw it in there. I'm in the Alaska Army National Guard, and we deployed, and there was a family day prior to deployment where everyone kind of meets in a big ballroom and you breakout sessions for kids and spouses. And I just remember the other officers when they said, you're coming by yourself. And I was like, no, I'm bringing my husband. And just the look of shock, like, it's all of a sudden realizing that just by me doing what everyone else is going to do is going to be a big deal. And I do remember the start of the session that we sat at our table and no one sat at our table. And the commander got up with his wife and came and sat with us.
Oh, that's so amazing.
It was a big deal.
That's a big deal. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird existence to be, and then, and then people are like, want you to be the role model, or, if you're doing this, every other gay person or queer person, however you want to describe it, is like that. Or, it's just like, we're just people.
I know.
People. Like,
but it's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot. And,
And you were, the first gay mayor, the first woman mayor, the first gay, you were a lot of firsts. You had a lot of people, that were saying they were big fans, and maybe all they knew were these identities that you yourself may not have put out there.
Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, I feel like if there's some, gay person out there, whether they're a kid or they're an adult or whatever, and they feel empowered by seeing me do that, or by seeing Chris get elected or Felix get elected, that's amazing. Like that. And I do know how it feels to be like them. Maybe not every aspect, but the things we were just talking about, straight people don't deal with that. They don't. And so you have pieces of it, no matter where you feel like you fit on that spectrum, and no matter what sort of your, detailed experiences are, I think. And, that was the part that was so cool, is to have people come up to me and say like, wow, this changed my view of like what's possible. And that's pretty special.
So, Steph, I want to ask you what your experience was like as the First Lady of Anchorage.
Oh, it was, we joke around about this because when she first was running for assembly, I was like, oh, I just want to be a First Lady, which was just a joke, a running joke. And then here it, actually happens. I just was in like major support mode of what can I do to make her days a little bit easier, seeing how much she was working in that bedroom locked away on all the meetings with her staff. And just, it felt like every day was intense. There was never not even a weekend day where there wasn't something that needed to be addressed. And so I viewed my role as just like, I don't have a very stressful job. What can I be doing? Making dinners, taking the dogs out for walks, running errands, just whatever I could do to create space for her to breathe a little bit more.
Did you ever think, well, I didn't really sign up for this. How did this happen?
No, we made the decision together.
To run for the assembly or for the mayor?
For the assembly and the mayor. Yeah, it was a decision we made together. I originally was like, no way, don't be the mayor. This is going to be crazy. This is a crazy time. But we talked about it a lot, and in the end, it felt like it was the right thing for the city. And talked about what it could look like and what I was capable of doing and running support. And it was going to be 8 months, and we'll get through it. We have done hard things before together, and so and we're a good team. Running her campaign the first time around,
you ran it.
Well, I didn't run it, but we did.
Y'all did.
We didn't have, she didn't have a campaign manager, so we did that 6
Even
week
the second
sprint
time we did it
together, and yeah.
Do you go door to door for her? I mean, do you do stuff on your own, or do you always do it with her? How do you?
We do a mix, but in her first campaign, I was doing a lot of door knocking, just me running out there on my bike, going door to door for her. Yeah.
Steph's really good at the data part. So when you run a campaign, you want to know, where the votes are coming from, how many people in each precinct. With vote by mail, you can kind of see how votes come in and then identify people who haven't voted yet and try to reach them for GOTV efforts. So there's a big data component that Steph is really good at. And also, we both love communications and feel like that's a really important part of what you do in a campaign. And so,
when you're mayor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so we brainstorm a lot together. I mean, we do talk a lot about her job, whether when she was in the mayorship and now when she's on the assembly. We talk a lot about the decisions that are being made, and because we're both we really care about our community, and she respects my perspective and I respect hers, and we have, I think, like a healthy dialogue back and forth and learn from each other as a result of that. And so I think that there might be some spouses where they're like, no, I don't want to hear about what is happening on the assembly, or and that's not me. I want to know what's going on in her life, and I want to know what's going on in my community, and if there are things that I can do as a result of just being involved in her campaign and then knowing everything from her being on the assembly. I'm now on my community council board, for better or worse.
Did you get to do any events as the First Lady? I only bring that up because I've never really noticed if, for example, Mayor Bronson's wife has a book club happening at the library. I mean, she's doing little things, and I just don't know. Did you get to do any of that stuff?
I didn't. I think the only thing I got to tag along on was, I think, watching like the dogs, the canines for the police department, because I'm a big dog lover. And so that was the one thing Austin's like, if there's one thing you can do, I'm like, I want to meet the police dogs. And so I got to meet the police dogs and see them in action with some of their training with the SWAT team. And that was pretty impressive, how well trained those dogs are.
Steph used to work in Emonic, which is at the mouth of the Yukon River. And she was out there with Fish and Game and has rescued 15 dogs from Emonic and found them homes back in Anchorage. So it's really a passion of hers, including our dog, Dexter.
Very cool. Was it a relief? This is a question for both of you. You can answer that. Was it a relief when being mayor was over?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated, right? I mean, no one except for someone who was a mayor during COVID understands the heaviness that came with that during that time. I mean, it really, my colleagues on the assembly get it to some extent, but it's different on that side. And it's like, it's you and people are looking at you. And so, that was a hard period. And I got COVID myself and, pretty sick at one point. And, I was home and everything, but just not feeling great. And it was good. Then we went through an election. I mean, the fact that was during the process, right? Because that disrupts sort of what kind of policy is possible and what the voters are going to think about actions you take and all of those things. And so it was good when it was over because it was such a difficult period. That said, that went away quickly. And I think that's because right at the end of our, my tenure and our team, we instituted a parental leave policy, which is good for the city because it saves money, keeps people around, they're more likely to leave if you don't have parental leave. And it's good for kids and it's good for families, et cetera. And, Mayor Bronson, one of the first things he did was get rid of that. Doesn't take too many of those things to go, wait a minute. This is a disappointment that, there's a new person here and that person's not making the decisions that I respect and admire. And for the city, that's sad. For me, I could go back to doing my other job. I can take a walk with my family now. That's nice.
Well, two quick things about that. And I guess the first is a question that you purposely sort of left some decisions to the new mayor, and you were kind of making the decision before you knew who the new mayor would be, it seemed like that you weren't like the librarian, for example, that you weren't going to make these decisions. You were going to let the new mayor do it. So my first question on that is, has the new administration ever thanked you for leaving some of those decisions to them?
Absolutely not. No.
And the perfect follow-up question is, in retrospect, do you wish that you had gone ahead and made some of those decisions because some of them were your decisions to make and you were politely allowing them to have those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's three big ones. I would actually say two, which I would think are the police chief and I was going to say Tudor Elmore, but no, the Alaska Club on Tudor. So I think those are two that were really obvious to the community that I had to decide whether to make the call or not. And I made the call with Ken, and Ken became the acting chief. And I hoped that would set him up to become the chief. Now we know that he's left, and like many others, and that's unfortunate. But so that part I felt good about. I didn't want us to. It was so perfect. It was so lined up. We had this fire, that facility on Tudor would have sheltered up to 125, maybe 150 people. They were going to do all these renovations. Right now, real estate's in a whole different ballgame, right? Back then, people were desperate. I mean, a gym that's been hemorrhaging money, unfortunately, desperate to offload that facility, giving us an excellent deal. So yeah, could we have closed on it? Absolutely. Would it be sitting there unused because of a stubborn mayor that doesn't want to do the right thing, just like he's doing with the Golden Lion? Yes. And so I knew at that time that we couldn't you can't pressure someone into doing the right thing. You can try to help them. And I actually felt that giving him this decision and letting him come around to it, because I did know who was going to be the mayor at the time, was better than trying to bully him, basically. And I think that had we bought that building, it would be sitting there. And
Right.
it would have been a waste of money. Maybe we'd be using it, maybe not. But I mean, we have the Golden Line sitting there. That was a $15 million project that we used MLMP proceeds for, contrary to public belief. There's no CARES Act money involved. It's not necessarily for homeless folks. It's for anyone experiencing issues that they need treatment for,
Right.
Substance misuse. We could have an operational treatment center and a shelter right now.
Mm-hmm.
We could have those online.
Mm.
There's one reason we don't, because we have a stubborn mayor who came in and wanted to blow everything up and then took 6 months of hand-holding to finally get to a point where he's willing to somewhat cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we are. And we just wasted a bunch of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so do I regret my decisions? No. I regret his decisions. And I wish he had, treated our police chief better, and so that he could stick around. I wish he'd make better decisions on homelessness. But, we're getting a little better now. I think he's starting to see his campaign rhetoric was, put him in jail, whatever. Now there's a little bit more of like, oh, we need a navigation center. We actually need people to go into housing. Talking to Alexis today, she admitted sort of the difference in what she thought before. And,
Mm-hmm.
surprise, surprise, when you get, and I don't mean this rudely to her, but we've been around for a while. When you see these people who don't really know much about the topic, and then they suddenly get educated, and they go, wait a minute, it's actually better to shelter people and find housing for them and get housing reimbursement through vouchers that are paid by state or federal government. And then you don't have to deal with all the, other issues in the city. It's like, yeah, that's what we've been trying to work on. So I'm glad she's come around. I can only hope for the best. But the library thing, really, that's the irony of all of this, is that I didn't view the library as a political position.
Mm-hmm.
Because the librarian shouldn't be political.
Mm-hmm.
The librarian is there to serve the public. We had some homelessness sort of navigator positions that they wanted to add there to help. A lot of people who come into the library, they're like, need food, they need the internet, they're poor. Like,
They need a place to sit all day.
Exactly. It is the front lines. And so to me, that's not a political place. That's a place to serve the public. And so we had a librarian who did that, right? And she would find ways, grant money and otherwise, to serve the public in a variety of ways. And so when Mary Jo left, which I believe was in April, and I was leaving at the end of June, rather than try to rush that and hire a new person, we put out the posting and thought, you know what? We'll find someone, whether it's us or the next mayor, we'll find someone who's a librarian. I mean, who would have thought that would be exotic, or controversial to think that the librarian should be a librarian? So, yeah, that one shouldn't have surprised me given the national antics, but it surprised me a bit.
Mm-hmm. So, Stephanie, were you relieved when she was finished being mayor?
I think I have a similar reaction of a mix of relief of, okay, we'll get to go on walks again together. We'll get to, breathe a little bit more, but also just knowing that there was going to be a change coming in our city. And what would that really look like and what did it mean? Not knowing, July 1 to now, just how much would be different. I think you hope for the best. And I think that's where I was at on July 1. And yeah, I wish that in some ways I struggle because it was a very difficult time. You have to give your whole life to that position if you want to do it right and do right by the community. And so I struggle with it because in some ways I don't want her to do that, but at the same time I know she's the person who is going to be the best in that position. She's going to make the right decisions for our community and for the most disadvantaged in our community and people who need it most. And it's a little sad to know that she's not there right now.
Could you run for mayor? Is that something?
I suppose anyone could run for mayor. Yeah. I mean, we've learned that.
Well, I want to talk about your future plans. I mean, y'all are having a baby.
Yeah.
Baby.
Early June. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do y'all know if it's a boy or girl?
It's a boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
And So what's that going to look like? I mean, do you have the baby?
I don't know. You tell us.
You have a child. How does it go?
I will tell you everything that you thought your life was going to look like. It will look different, and you will wonder, how did this happen? There's a lot of things like that. But so I guess that is, so you know what? I'll scratch the question. I can ask you guys what you guys have planned, how your life is going to look like with the baby. It will probably look different. But I mean, are you both going to keep working? I mean, I guess that's some baseline questions. What's that going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are fortunate enough that, I work out of our home. I have a very understanding employer, great work environment.
Yeah, what do you do right now?
Yeah, I work for Alaska Venture Fund. It's a philanthropic organization, and growing rapidly. But just have a great crew of coworkers, super supportive, and they're just. I just feel like they're there to help me get through. Like welcome me back to work when I'm ready to come back to work. There's several moms who are coworkers, help navigate what that looks like. But yeah, we this is a new adventure for us. It's I hate to put it this way, but it's a new campaign. It's something we're doing together as a team and figuring out as we go. And I think we're trying to remain pretty flexible and low key about it and not have too many plans, knowing that whatever we plan is probably not going to end up being the truth. So I think we're just ready to kind of take it as it comes. And again, the thing that we say to each other is, we've done hard things before. And yes, having a kid is very hard, but being the mayor is also very hard. So it's different scenarios for sure. But I just feel like we just work really well together, and I think we just feel really solid heading into this. Like, we're going to make it through this. It's going to be okay when we're only sleeping a few hours a night. we're going to be fine. But
Steph has leave for the first 6 weeks, and then so I can work to the extent I'm needed. I'm going to try to not work quite as much the first month or so, a few weeks. Yeah, and then I think people have said it's really fun to have a baby in the summer because you can get out and do more. So we're looking forward to that. And Steph is going to go back to work in part of the summer, and we're going to rely on some help with family and friends, hopefully. And then she'll be able to take a little more time in the fall when the baby's a little older. So I think, Steph is definitely carrying more of the weight on the leave.
And literally carrying.
Yeah, well. Yeah.
So I will say this is something that's it's not a gay thing. It's not anyone having a baby in Alaska is having the rest of your family super far away. Are y'all planning on flying moms up, or I'll just say I flew my mom up in March because my husband had to go somewhere for 5 days, and I was like, I can't even get him to school on time and be at work on time, little things like that.
Yeah. Yes, my mom is a food director for a kids camp, summer camp. And so her big season is like April to October. So she would like to be here for more time, but the timing is couldn't be worse for her. But I think she'll come, for 5 days or something when she can get away. It's kind of crazy at her work, and just she's like there works almost every day. She's very busy. So and then we're planning to have my mom come in December and January if we can sort of get to that through a patchwork of leave and everything, and then she would be full-time care while we're back to work before we transition to daycare. So we'll see if that works. But we're trying to be flexible about it. We're just like, we'll just have to figure it out. Yeah, and I think I was just talking to Alexis, actually, the mayor's office. It's like people have these, I've got a burst plan, or I've got totally cool if that works for people. We don't have any plans.
Right.
We really don't. We know we're going to Providence, and we're going to figure it out.
We're going to Providence, and this baby's coming out.
Right.
Yeah. And people have been doing this for years and years with a whole heck of a lot less support.
Right.
So we're going to be okay, and we'll figure it out. And
We have
Yeah.
a great community up here.
Yeah.
Even though our family is in the lower 48, we just have such a wonderful network of friends up here. So many people have reached out, willing to help out. We have a really close friend who has fostered essentially 7 babies.
Oh, wow.
And she's super
She's a saint.
knowledgeable. She's
Yeah.
a saint. And
Yeah.
and she
So you've got a resource.
she's willing to come
She's
over
also
and
gay,
help us
kind of
out.
knows
Yeah.
some of those challenges.
But she's just like, I'm gonna be there for you guys. If you need some sleep, I'm coming over. I'm gonna help you out.
Well, like we were talking about earlier, I think even just going to Providence to have the baby as a same-sex couple would be introducing yourself to the nurses,
Totally.
like when they're like, "Where's Dad?"
Right,
having to
right,
deal with
yeah.
that issue.
Yeah.
How did you guys?
Well, we fostered to adopt,
Okay.
but I will just say that relating to this topic, we started in California.
Mm.
And we chose to keep everything in California, even though we've been living up here for a couple of years, because we were so nervous about Alaska. And, we knew that we had a very secure path
Yep.
in Santa Cruz County. Austin Quinn-Davidson, Stephanie Quinn-Davidson, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah,
It's our pleasure.
been fun talking with you.
Thank you to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable, and thank you to you, our listeners. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe, rate us, and review us. Next week on the show, an Alaskan legend. Joe Josephson started out as a staffer to Delegate Bob Bartlett prior to statehood. He then served in the Alaska House of Representatives and on the Anchorage Assembly, where he helped author our municipal charter. He is almost 90 years old, but still works full-time as an attorney. He also happens to be the father of my Alaska House Representative, Andy Josephson. Please tune in. Do not speak for the Alaska Army National Guard, the U.S. military, or the federal government in any way, shape, or form. I speak for myself only.